Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show. You daily dive into the news. It is Tuesday, and there is a lot we need to talk about today, starting with this. We need to talk about Trump's guy, Paul Ingrassia, who has a bit of a Nazi streak in it. And mind you, those are his words, not mine. Right? And if you're not familiar with Paul, back in May, Trump nominated him to run the Office of Special Counsel, which is the agency that's meant to investigate federal employee whistleblower complaints, discrimination claims, and other sensitive work. Well, now that we've seen his leaked text messages, it seems like maybe he's not the best guy for that job. Right? Because you have Politico releasing this bombshell article detailing some of the messages between Ingrassia and roughly 6 other Republican operatives and influencers. And with that, some of the highlights include a conversation from January of 2024 in which Ingrassia wrote, MLK Jr. was the 1960s George Floyd, and his holiday should be ended and tossed into the 7th circle of hell where it belongs. Then around a month later, he followed that up with, we need competent white men in positions of leadership, saying the founding fathers were wrong that all men are created equal. We need to reject that part of our heritage. With him then appearing to double down on that in a later exchange in May, where you had him talking to an unnamed Trump campaign staffer who was working on outreach to minority voters, and you had Politico saying that Ingrassia suggested that the staffer didn't show enough deference to the founding fathers being white, which then prompted someone else to say Paul belongs in the Hitler Youth with Steve Bannon, to which Ingrassia responded, I do have a Nazi streak in me from time to time, I will admit it. And then actually when he was met with some pushback there, Ingrassia dug in his heels, saying we should celebrate white men and Western civilization and I will never back down from that. Right? And he maintained that despite several members of the chat telling him to pull back and saying that he was coming across with a tinge of racism. Right? And all of that, it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. Right? Ingrassia also made some explicitly racist comments against people from China and India and Africa. Paul saying, I said we're making Kwanzaa illegal in the next Trump admin. And then also using an Italian slur for black people. But with all that said, the group chat around May, it ends up getting disbanded. With it being reported, that's because other members were tired of Ingrassia's rhetoric. Right? And with that, you had Politico saying they got these messages from someone else in the chat who saved them, sharing them on the condition of anonymity. Right? And adding that they felt like they had to share this to do this because they don't think Ingrassia is qualified for the position he's up for. Saying he was too young and too inexperienced to deal with the fame. It was like giving an 18-year-old 10 million and saying, have at it, kid. Right? And with all this, I think it's important to note that Politico also corroborated the messages with another person in the chat, as well as verified the number associated with Ingrassia in the chat, saying it actually belongs to him. All of which prompted Ingrassia's attorney to immediately try to do some damage control, right? Suggesting that the messages may be fake before then adding, however, even if the texts are authentic, they clearly read as self-deprecating and satirical humor, making fun of the fact that liberals outlandishly and routinely call MAGA supporters Nazis, and saying in reality, Mr. Ingrassia has incredible support from the Jewish community because Jews know that Mr. Ingrassia is the furthest thing from a Nazi. But then, within days, the attorney shifted gears and was doubling down on the claim that the messages in fact were not real, and had another statement saying, in this age of AI, authentication of allegedly leaked messages, which could be outright falsehoods, doctored, or manipulated, or lacking critical context, is extremely difficult. We do not concede the authenticity of any of these purported messages. Also, while we're seeing this play out, I think it's important to mention that this is not Ingrassia's first scandal by any means. In fact, just earlier this month, it was reported that he was the subject of an internal investigation at the Department of Homeland Security, where he currently works as White House liaison after a sexual harassment complaint was filed against him. So there, I'll say that the woman who made the complaint quickly withdrew it and said that nothing happened. And then also, there's the fact that his nomination hearing was delayed by the GOP-led Senate Committee on Homeland Securities and Governmental Affairs, with some senators expressing concerns about Ingrassia's previous anti-Semitic comments, as well as his connections to Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate. But for now, we'll have to wait to see, is Ingrassia's nomination actually in serious jeopardy, or is this noise for an administration that's kind of able to get the rest of the Republicans on board and move forward with pretty much anything? But then next up in the news, let's talk about this interesting news around the trial over Charlie Kirk's assassination and the bill that it's wrecking up. Because we've known that the trial is going to take place in Utah County, Utah, and the Wall Street Journal, they just did a piece about how, this usually quiet area is not used to getting this national attention, let alone the frenzy that comes with a high-profile assassination. And now the costs associated are a very, very big issue. You've got officials saying that the last few weeks they've been scrambling to come up with the $5 million they believe that this trial is going to require, which is over 3% of the county's entire general operating fund. With one of the elected county commissioners saying, we are looking under the proverbial couch cushions. And adding, for 2 weeks, I could hardly eat or sleep because I was so worried about where we were going to find these resources. Neither the accused perpetrator nor the victim were residents of my county, so it's crazy we're this stressed. Right? As far as, what the costs associated with this trial will be, you have a defense team, new hires at the prosecutor's office, police overtime, and safety measures like a SWAT team and armored vehicles to transport the suspect. And so then with that, not everyone's happy about their money being used in this way, right? Because some people in Utah, they don't want their taxpayer dollars going to some major defense team for the alleged assassin. And with that, just last week, you had the Salt Lake Tribune reporting that the county is spending more on the Kirk suspect's defense team than on other death penalty cases. Because apparently his attorneys are being paid $275 an hour, while the ones representing the county's other 2 suspects facing a potential death penalty are making $225 an hour. And then on top of that, the county has also reportedly agreed to cover security for the team's court appearances at around $40 an hour. But then with that, you had a spokesperson for the county defending the pay gap, saying, we knew from the outset that this case is going to require much more work than a typical case when it comes to evidence, media attention, public scrutiny, and more. That's reflected in the rate. Knowing that the case was extraordinary going into it, we worked on that language ahead of time. And actually, according to reports, the PR element was the biggest hurdle to clear when finding a firm willing to take on this case in the first place. And then with that, you had the county commissioner arguing that these efforts, they're well worth it. And it's the best use of taxpayer dollars to ensure that he had good, competent defense the first time so that we don't have to go to retrials because of rookie mistakes. Because what's more expensive than a high-profile trial? Two of them. But then next up in the news, Republicans in North Carolina's Senate, they officially voted this morning to change their congressional districts for their daddy Trump. And while obviously, things have been happening behind the scenes for longer, the debate on the new map, it officially only happened for a single day in the state legislature. Right? In this new map, it's likely going to target the district held by Representative Don Davis, who's a Democrat and one of 3 black members of Congress from North Carolina. And with that, it also likely means that outside of a miracle at the polls, Republicans will control 11 out of the 14 U.S. House seats from North Carolina. Right now with this, Republicans in the state and across the U.S., they used to argue that these new congressional maps, they were needed to better represent the will of the voters since Trump won a mandate in the 2024 election. But that's just not true for a number of reasons, right? Including in North Carolina, Trump barely won 50% of the vote in 2024, but his party will now control about 78% of the state's House seats. Right? In fact, now you have lawmakers there just taking the mask completely off.
The motivation behind this redraw is simple and singular. Draw a new map that will bring an additional Republican seat to the North Carolina congressional delegation. Republicans hold a razor-thin margin in the United States House of Representatives. And if Democrats flip 4 seats in the upcoming midterm elections, they will take control of the House and torpedo President Trump's agenda.
And so with all this, from here, the plan goes to the State House, which is expected to pass it without issue, and then it goes to Democratic Governor Josh Stein's desk. And well, you might think because Stein is a Democrat, he's just going to be able to veto the thing and the problem's solved. He actually doesn't have the power in this situation, so he's essentially being forced to sign it. But also, I will say, without a doubt, there is going to be a ton of lawsuits related to the situation, so this is not going to be the last we hear about it. Nor should you expect us to not talk about gerrymandering in general, right? In North Carolina, it's just the latest move in this mass state redistricting fight. And again, that's a story, this part's my opinion. State Dem politicians from the lowest on the totem pole all the way up to the governor, you need to treat the situation we're all in right now as the potential endgame. Acting normal when the world is abnormal, your enemies are abnormal, is not normal. It's given up. It's honestly cowardice, and cowards get no cover in what's coming. It's stupid, it's cowardly, it's short-sighted. We're not at the beginning of something. We're well into it. And I just don't know how loud the fucking alarm bells need to be for some of them to wake up. And then there's more we need to dive into, but first, let me take a minute to say October, it hits different. Some days they call for hot coffee, others for ice, and sometimes it's just, pumpkin spice time. Personally, I'm a cold brew in the morning and a hot cup in the afternoon kind of guy. That's why I love today's sponsor, Trade Coffee, the #1 destination for both hot and cold coffee lovers. Especially because right now they're celebrating with a ridiculous deal, 50% off a 1-month trial at drinktrade.com/DeFranco. Because Trade doesn't ship random beans. They match you with roasts that you'll love with a quick quiz. It's like Tinder, but with a different aftertaste. If you're into cold brew, they've teamed up with expert roasters for beans made just for that smooth all-day cold brew trip. Maybe you're more of a hot coffee person. They'll line you up with bold roasts that taste like fall in a mug without the overpriced cafe trip. And the freshness is unreal, right? Beans are roasted to order, landing on your doorstep before your last sad grocery bag runs out. The prices are grocery store level, but the quality, way higher. Plus, you're supporting local roasters. Also, if you don't vibe with your first bag, Trade will replace it free until they nail it. Don't settle for meh coffee. Upgrade your life with Trade. Especially because right now, Trade's offering 50% off a 1-month trial. Just scan that QR code or go to drinktrade.com/DeFranco to get 50% off your first month. That's drinktrade.com/DeFranco to get 50% off 1 month. drinktrade.com/DeFranco. But then next up in the news, if you live in Georgia or you know someone who does, please listen up. Please let them know, because you could have a very real chance of impacting a very, very important election. Because if voters, they sit out of this election that a lot of people don't even know is happening, energy companies are going to keep writing the rules. They're going to hike up your bills, overbuild for profit, and lock Georgians into decades of higher costs. And you're crazy if you think it ends with Georgia. And a lot of people don't know about this because it's a special election for 2 members of Georgia's Public Service Commission. That's a sentence that just, it makes a number of people's eyes glaze over, right? You hear Public Service Commission, but also, that's what they're counting on. But really, I beg you to lock in, and this is going to be worth your time. So in order to understand why these 2 races are so damn important, you need to know what the Public Service Commission, or PSC, actually does. And so at the very top level, a PSC is a state-level government agency that regulates essential public utilities, things like electricity, gas, water, right? And sometimes they have different names like Public Utilities Commission, but every state has some version of this. And as far as why we need these agencies, it's because most public utilities are natural monopolies. And while we normally think, monopoly is bad, this is actually in the public interest, right? Energy utilities, like for example, power companies, they require tons of infrastructure that costs billions and billions of dollars to build and operate. You've got all the different power lines, the plant substations, the control systems. So it's way more efficient and cost effective for everyone to just have one system. But in order to keep utility monopolies from doing the bad shit that monopolies can do, you need some kind of regulator to protect the public, which is where PSCs come in. And PSCs, they do it all. They approve how much energy utilities can charge their customers, ensure safety and reliability, and implement renewable energy projects and efficiency programs to save power, right? And they also greenlight infrastructure projects like new power plants and set rates for how much money utilities are allowed to make from their investment investments in those projects. So what we're talking about are incredibly powerful agencies that shape energy and environmental policy in each state and oversee a multi-billion-dollar market. Now with that, these commissions, they also vary dramatically from state to state, right? They range in size from 3 to 7 seats, and in the vast majority of those states, those seats are nonpartisan and filled by the governor or legislature. But there are also 10 states that allow voters to elect their commissioners, and all of those elections are partisan, making candidates run as Democrats or Republicans. And in Georgia specifically, there are 5 partisan commissioners who are elected by voters to serve 6-year terms, right? And also, the reason that Georgia is having the special election is very important to keep in mind, and it's because it stems from a lawsuit that challenged the process that the state uses to elect its commissioners. Right? So each of the 5 commissioners represents a different district in the state, but when one of them goes up for election, everyone votes in a statewide election, not just the district they represent, which then also explains why all 5 of the current commissioners are Republicans, even though Georgia is a purple state with some large blue cities like Atlanta. So in 2020, a group of black voters filed a lawsuit arguing that the statewide elections diluted their voting power and denied them the ability to pick a candidate of their choice. And that, it resulted in years of ongoing legal back and forth that we're not going to really get into. But what you do need to know with that is because of the litigation, Georgia's Republican Secretary of State canceled the PSC elections in 2022 and 2024. And then last year, Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed a law resetting the schedule for all PSC elections and allowing all the Republican commissioners to stay in their seats well after their terms expire. So as a result, there are 2 PSC elections this year. One for the seat in District 2, which covers the eastern part of the state, including Athens and Savannah, and the other is for District 3, which contains much of the Atlanta metro area. But then also, you've seen Republican lawmakers getting a ton of backlash for planning these races outside of a usual election year. Right, turnout is already traditionally low for PSC races nationally because these commissions are so technical and bureaucratic, and very few people actually know what they do or why they're so important. But also, the turnout's even lower when there aren't other major races on the ballot driving out voters. And so it's part of the reason why I'm bringing these special elections to your attention. These races could be easily swayed by a few thousand more people voting. I mean, honestly, maybe even just a few hundred. I mean, the turnout for PSC primaries was literally just 2.8% of all 7.4 million active voters in the entire state of Georgia. But again, that says these elections are incredibly important and have super high stakes for a number of reasons, right? And what you've seen is over the last few years, the Republican-controlled PSC has implemented several controversial moves that critics say prioritize the financial benefits of energy companies over consumer interests. But one of the biggest sticking points has been the major rate increases on customers. And according to reports, the PSC approved requests by Georgia Power, the state's largest energy provider, to increase rates 6 times just in the last 2 years, citing increased costs of fuel and electricity driven by inflation. And those price hikes have increased average customer rates by $43 per month, or $516 more each year compared to just 2 years ago. Also, the PSC has increased the amount of money that energy utilities can make from their investments in new projects. And so that's driving up their rate of return to nearly 12%, higher than the roughly 8 to 10% that's standard across the country. Right? And that's also significant because it increases incentives for energy companies to build more infrastructure. Right? So the more that they invest in new building projects, the more money they get in return from their investments. And while yes, that may be a good incentive to have when more infrastructure is needed, it also creates a world where utilities want to build more, even when it's not really necessary. Now that said, plenty of new builds are needed to revitalize infrastructure and keep up with the new demand. But when the PSC approves those builds, it can create decades of higher prices for consumers who help cover those costs. And that's why it's so important to have a PSC that only approves necessary projects and keeps the corporate interests in check. But what you have are major concerns that Georgia's Republican commissioners are just not doing enough to regulate energy companies amid the ongoing AI boom. Georgia, I don't know if you know this, has already become one of the leading states for new construction of AI data centers, which require a metric fuck ton of energy. And in order to meet that demand, new energy infrastructure needs to be built by the energy utilities, who, of course, profit from those builds. AI data centers are a major cash cow for utilities, period. But with that, you've got experts saying that the data center boom, it could also be a great excuse for utilities to overestimate the amount of infrastructure that they actually need so they can overbuild and make more money. Now with that, you have the Georgia PSC and major utilities saying they won't let residential consumers pay the increased costs of new data center infrastructure. But that is, you have many others, including advocates, saying they're highly skeptical there, saying that the commissioners aren't actually doing their jobs, and they're accusing them of doing whatever the utilities want instead of pushing back against expensive builds or overly optimistic growth forecasts. Right? And with that, saying that they haven't implemented proper safeguards to protect consumers already grappling with increased rates, which many suspect are actually driven at least in part by the AI data center boom. And so these elections are a chance to break up a commission that many feel just isn't acting in the best interest of the people that it represents, all while also creating a balance to the power of the all-Republican PSC to better reflect the views of a purple state. Right? And so, for example, in District 2, the Republican incumbent Tim Echols is being challenged by Democrat Alicia Johnson. And Johnson has criticized the PCS's rate increases and demanded more accountability for data centers. And then in District 3, Commissioner Fitz Johnson is facing off against Peter Hubbard, a Democrat who claims that PSC hasn't done enough to keep bills down or protect consumers from data center costs. And hey, if you want to know more about the candidates, I'm going to link to that down below, but I'm going to provide voting resources down below as well. You need to vote. Early voting, it's already begun. It's going to continue until Halloween. I'm going to vote tomorrow morning. And if you're not able to early vote before then, the actual election is Tuesday, November 4th. Again, I'm going to link to voting resources. You can also go to sos.ga.gov. Right, find your polling place. Sometimes early voting place is different than the day of election voting place. But this is incredibly important. And also, whether you're in Georgia or not, please send this video, the idea of it, a clip of it, I don't care how you do it, to just people that you know in your state, post it on your socials, just get it out there. Change, it starts local, and that's for the good and the bad. And then there's more we're gonna dive into, but first, I wanna talk about today's sponsor, Incogni, but especially as a 378 gigabyte database from the largest US credit union leaked online. Gigabytes, not megabytes. And while customer accounts weren't exposed, the archive still had hashed passwords, internal usernames, emails, and system logs. So like they didn't leak your info, just everything that hackers need to come after it. So comforting. Because even when your personal details aren't in the dump, leaks like this, they fuel phishing, credential stuffing, and social engineering attacks. Or translation, hackers can target you even when the breach wasn't about you. And well, Incogni, they help wipe your personal data from the internet by automatically contacting data brokers who collect and sell it. Right? Thousands of companies already hold your name, email, phone number, address, relatives, job history, and even shopping habits. Doing removals by yourself? No. Incogni handles it for you, and they keep fighting when brokers resist. Right? In their new custom removal feature on unlimited and family plans, they let you point to any site where your information appears, and their privacy team handles the takedown. I signed up, I gave Incogni permission, and now I just watch the dashboard updates roll in. It kind of feels like a digital spring cleaning. And remember, like even one exposed profile can lead to scam, stalking, or fraud, but Incogni helps shut those doors. So hey, use code DeFranco and protect yourself with 60% off by scanning the QR code or going to incogni.com/DeFranco. But then next up in the news, a federal court just handed Donald Trump a massive win, and we need to talk about what that means moving forward, right? Because you've got a 2-1 ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals claiming it is likely that he lawfully exercised his statutory authority when he federalized Oregon's National Guard to send them into what he called war-ravaged Portland. And so with this decision, they're overturning a temporary restraining order put in place by a lower court judge who was actually appointed by Trump. Though I will say that judge, she actually issued 2 orders blocking the mobilization of federal troops to Portland. The first blocked his activation of the Oregon National Guard, and then the second, it came after Trump tried to get around the first order by sending troops from California, blocking him from sending any state's National Guard to Oregon. And so since that second order is still technically in place, troops can't immediately be mobilized. Though you had the Trump administration arguing that it should also be overruled because both lower court orders relied on the same legal reasoning. Right? And that reasoning being that Trump's determination that the situation in Portland required a federal military response was, quote, simply untethered to the facts. With Team Trump arguing that the troops were needed because immigration officers and property were the subject of regular, often violent protests. And you've likely seen Trump posting on social media that the deployment was needed to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. But of course, according to local and state officials, residents of Portland, and journalists on the ground, Trump's characterization was just outright false. Right? Because while protests there have gotten sometimes rowdy, with police making several arrests and at one point in the summer even declaring a riot, they've also been very small, isolated, and handled by law enforcement. I mean, you even had the assistant police chief confirming in a declaration to the court that the protests have never been so out of control that local officers couldn't respond. Writing on any given weekend, the nightlife in Portland's entertainment district has warranted greater resources than the small nightly protests in front of the ICE facility. And then with that, you also had the judge who initially blocked the deployment in September, noting in her decision that it had been months since there was any sustained level of violent or disruptive protest activity. But of course, we're talking about this today because 2 of the judges on the appeals court panel, also appointed by Trump, argued that the first judge, quote, accorded no deference to the president's determination that he could not execute federal laws with regular forces, and saying she substituted her own assessment of the facts for the president's assessment of the facts, and then claiming that she, quote, discounted the violent and disruptive events that occurred in June, July, and August, including the resulting closure of the ICE facility for over 3 weeks in June and July. So I will say, regarding the closure, while the Justice Department did claim that the facility had become inoperable thanks to the protests, you've then also had Oregon Public Broadcasting looking at the data. Right in there, finding that the assertion that the building has been out of commission is inaccurate, and adding, during the 3 weeks in question, ICE officers booked 25 people into the Portland facility. But then also with this, you had the third judge on the appeals court panel, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, absolutely slamming her colleague's arguments, writing, it is illogical to assert that because an emergency existed 3 months ago, the same emergency exists today, saying a pot of tepid water is not a pot of boiling water and it cannot hurt you, even if it was boiling 3 hours earlier. Rather than saying, given Portland protesters' well-known penchant for wearing chicken suits, inflatable frog costumes, or nothing at all when expressing their disagreements with the methods employed by ICE, observers may be tempted to view the majority's ruling, which accepts the government's characterization of Portland as a war zone, as merely absurd. But adding, today's decision is not merely absurd. It erodes core constitutional principles, including sovereign states' control over their states' militias and the people's First Amendment rights to assemble and to object to the government's policies and actions. Rather than also urging her colleagues to act swiftly to vacate the majority's order before the illegal deployment of troops under false pretenses can occur. Right? And what she's talking about there is how a larger panel of 11 appellate judges could potentially reconsider the case and give a no decision. Right? And then with that, you had Oregon's Attorney General pushing for that, saying in a statement, today's ruling, if allowed to stand, would give the president unilateral power to put Oregon soldiers on our streets with almost no justification. And then adding, we are on a dangerous path in America. But of course, as far as the Trump administration, they have praised the rule, with the spokesperson saying this ruling reaffirms that the lower court's ruling was unlawful and incorrect. And so for now, we're gonna have to wait to see what happens. But also, this is happening as there are other similar cases that are underway, or we may see more of in the future. Right? I mean, just last week, for example, a federal appeals court upheld a lower court's ruling temporarily blocking Trump's federalization and deployment of the National Guard in Chicago. In Tennessee, a group of 7 elected officials have sued the governor governor and the state's attorney general for allowing the deployment of Tennessee National Guard to Memphis. All while you've got Trump now eyeing San Francisco as his next target. And again, it's against the wishes of state and local officials, so we're going to see another legal battle play out. But then from that, finally today, let's end with a little bit of a palate cleanser and a tease. Because tomorrow morning on Wednesday, I got a brand new episode of my podcast with Alex Perlman, Crashing Out, Going Out. And honestly, if you haven't subscribed to it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, definitely do. I think you can tell it's one of the only ways that I'm actually staying sane these days. And I've also seen a lot of people leaving comments saying the same thing.
It's getting dumber every single fucking day. He's tearing down sections of the White House to build, after saying in front of Triple H, he stood in front of Triple H and said that when we build this ballroom, it won't ever touch the actual White House. And then he started tearing down the East Wing.
Come on, that's classic WWE heel turn.
I know, but he's a WWE Hall of Famer. So I don't know why I expect better.
What's he doing with that excavator?
Oh my God, King! Oh my God! He's got the Money in the Bank briefcase and he's bringing it to